Daniel had never thought his life would bring him to the far edge of the galaxy, yet there he was, stepping off the shuttle with only a small pack on his back, his boots sinking into red dust that clung to everything, and his eyes drawn to the wide endless fields glowing faintly under a violet sky, a sky unlike any he had ever seen on Earth, both beautiful and unsettling, because it reminded him that he was very far from home and completely alone. He had left Earth behind after debts, broken dreams, and long hours of searching for work that never came left him desperate. And when the job advertisement appeared on the trade network, promising high wages for simple field work, he had seized it without hesitation, imagining long rows of crops and nothing more. But as he looked around the colony, he realized the truth might be more complicated, because the settlement was too quiet, the buildings made of smooth stone that seemed grown rather than built, and the aliens who hired him watched him with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark, their faces unreadable, their voices soft, yet filled with something he could not define, something like expectation. They called themselves the Thaleri, tall beings with slender limbs and silver markings running across their skin, and they explained very little beyond the task itself, telling him only that he was to plow the fields from dawn until dusk, guiding the heavy plow through soil that shimmered as though it were filled with stars. And though Daniel asked what exactly grew here, the overseer, a figure named Athalos, smiled in a way that was neither comforting nor threatening and said simply, "You will learn in time," before handing him a tool that looked like a cross between a machine and a living thing. Its handles warm to the touch as though it were breathing. Unsettled but unwilling to lose his first real chance at earning credits in years, Daniel agreed, though a small voice inside warned him that the warnings he had overheard during the shuttle ride, whispers from other workers about men who had come to the colony and then vanished, might not be just rumors. Still, he tried to calm himself, thinking that hard work never killed anyone, and maybe those others had simply quit, gone elsewhere, or fallen prey to bad luck. Because in a galaxy full of dangers, anything could happen. But when the colony gates closed behind him and he was led to the fields stretching out to the horizon, glowing faintly as if alive, he felt a weight in his chest he could not shake, as if the land itself were watching him. The first day began before the twin suns rose, the alien sky painted in shifting shades of green and violet, and Daniel struggled with the plow, finding it heavier than he expected, yet strangely responsive, almost guiding itself at times, pulling him deeper into the fields where the soil seemed to pulse under his feet. And though sweat poured down his back, he kept working, determined to prove himself. And he thought about the credits he would earn, about maybe sending some home, about maybe starting fresh. But each time he paused to catch his breath, he noticed the soil behind him glowing brighter where he had cut into it, tiny sparks rising like fireflies before vanishing into the air. And once, when he bent down to touch the earth, he swore he felt it move, like something shifting just beneath the surface, a vibration that ran through his bones and left his fingers tingling. When he reported this to Athalos, the alien simply placed a long hand on his shoulder and said, "Do not fear what you awaken." And those words did not comfort him at all, because they raised more questions than answers. And in the silence of the night, when he lay in his small quarters listening to the low hum that seemed to come from the very walls, he began to wonder if he had made a mistake. Yet he could not turn back, not now, not when this was his only chance. And so he told himself he would endure, at least until he understood what truly lay beneath these glowing fields, though deep down he already suspected that this was no ordinary farm, and that the job he had taken was about much more than plowing soil, because every instinct told him that something alive, something ancient, was waiting just below the ground for him to uncover. Daniel woke the next morning with aching muscles, the weight of yesterday's work still heavy in his bones, yet the memory of the glowing soil and the strange words of Athalos kept circling in his mind, refusing to let him rest. And as he stepped outside into the pale light of dawn, he saw the fields stretching endlessly again, their faint shimmer stronger, now as though the ground itself remembered his touch. And this unsettled him because farms on Earth never behaved like this. They were just dirt, predictable, silent, but here each furrow he had plowed seemed alive, and as he walked through the rows he noticed something new. The ground where he had worked was not only glowing, but also pulsing faintly, like a quiet heartbeat that rose and fell beneath the soil. And though he bent low and pressed his palm against it, he pulled back almost immediately, because it felt warm, too warm for earth, more like skin than stone, and for a brief second he thought he heard something, not with his ears but in the back of his mind. A faint whisper, too soft to understand, but it made the hairs on his neck rise. Still, he forced himself to keep working, gripping the strange plow with both hands, guiding it through the resistant soil that sometimes seemed eager to open, sometimes heavy as though fighting against him, and each time sparks flew up he felt both awe and fear, because no machine should create light from dirt. Yet here it happened with every strike. After hours of labor he noticed something else. The fields grew uneven behind him, not flat, but rising slightly where the plow had passed, forming ridges that moved if he stared long enough, as if something beneath was pushing upward, trying to break free. And this thought chilled him, because he remembered the whispers he had heard from other workers, stories of men who went to deep and never returned. And he wondered now if that was why the Thaleri had hired him, if the job was not about farming at all, but about stirring whatever lay beneath this strange land. During a short break he approached Athalos again, wiping the dust from his face and asking what exactly grew here, why the soil pulsed and glowed. But the tall alien only tilted his head with a slow smile and said, "The soil remembers and it chooses whom it answers," which only deepened Daniel's unease, because the words implied the land itself was alive, that it had awareness. And though he wanted to press for more answers, he could feel the weight of the other Thaleri watching, their ember-bright eyes fixed on him with quiet intensity, and he realized they would not explain, not yet, perhaps not ever, unless he discovered the truth for himself. That night when he returned to his quarters, he could not sleep. The strange hum he had noticed before was louder now, resonating with the pulse of the earth. And when he closed his eyes he saw flashes, fields stretching wider than planets, glowing, veins of light running through soil, and shapes moving just beneath the ground, immense and ancient, as though waiting to be born. And he woke drenched in sweat, his heart racing, unsure if it had been a dream or something placed in his mind by the soil itself. The next day he resolved to test it, to dig deeper, ignoring Athalos's calm instructions to keep to the surface. And so when he guided the plow down the rows he pressed harder, forcing it deeper into the shimmering dirt, and the ground resisted, with a shudder as though alive, then suddenly loosened, sending him stumbling as the plow struck something hard. Not stone, not metal, but smooth and crystalline, a surface that glowed brighter the longer he stared. And when he brushed away the soil with his hands he uncovered a seed-like object, the size of his chest, humming with quiet energy, its surface covered in faint patterns that pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. He reached out, compelled without knowing why, and the instant his fingers touched it a surge of heat ran through him, a wave of light flashing across the field. And in that moment he heard the whisper again, clearer now, a voice that spoke inside his mind saying, "You are the tiller, awaken us," and then silence, leaving Daniel on his knees gasping, the world around him spinning. And when he looked up he saw the Thaleri standing at the edge of the field, their glowing eyes fixed on him, not surprised, not alarmed, but expectant, as if they had been waiting for this exact moment. And as fear mixed with awe inside him he realized the job he had taken was no ordinary labor, that the soil he plowed was not just land but something far older and stranger, and that with every step he took he was awakening a secret the galaxy had forgotten, one that now saw him not as a worker, but as its chosen hand. Daniel could not shake the voice from his mind, the strange words that had thundered inside his head when his hand touched the glowing seed. And though the sound had faded, the memory lingered like an echo, heavy and unyielding. And as he stood in the field staring at the crystal-like object buried in the earth, he realized that the Thaleri had not moved to stop him. Not one of them had shouted or rushed forward. They simply watched him with their glowing eyes, their faces unreadable, as though his discovery was something expected, something they had been waiting for. And that frightened him more than the seed itself, because it meant that everything, his hiring, His work in the fields, and even his digging deeper, was part of a design he did not understand. When he tried to speak, to demand answers, his throat felt dry, his voice lost in the silent air. And finally Athelos approached slowly, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the shimmering soil, and in his calm voice he said, "The soil has chosen you, human. Do not fear what you uncover," before stepping back again, leaving Daniel more confused than ever, because it was not an explanation, only another layer of mystery. And when night came, he lay awake in his quarters replaying the moment over and over, remembering the heat, the pulse, and above all, the voice calling him the tiller, a word that sounded simple yet carried a weight that made his chest tighten. By the second dawn he could no longer resist the pull of the seed, so he returned to the field early, before most of the colony stirred, and knelt by the place where he had dug, the soil still warm and glowing faintly, and as he brushed away more dirt he uncovered more of the crystal, its smooth surface covered in tiny shifting lines like veins of light that seemed to move as he stared. And though fear urged him to stop, curiosity pushed him forward, his hands trembling as he unearthed nearly half of the object, revealing that it was not a rock but more like an egg, its surface humming with life. And this realization struck him like lightning, because eggs meant something waiting to hatch, something alive, and the thought of what size and shape of being could fit inside such a massive shell filled him with both dread and wonder. Suddenly the earth shuddered beneath him, a low vibration that made the air buzz, and Daniel stumbled back, gripping the strange plow for balance. And in that instant, he saw sparks rising from the ground all across the field, not just where he had worked, but in lines and patterns stretching outward as though connected. And he realized with a chill that there were not one or two, but perhaps hundreds of these seeds, buried beneath the soil, each waiting, each pulsing with faint light. And he whispered to himself that this was no farm. This was a cradle, a place not meant to grow crops, but to awaken something older than the colony itself. When the tremor stopped, the field grew quiet again, but the sense of being watched grew stronger, not just by the Thalari but by the land itself. And later, when he finally confronted Athelos demanding to know the truth, the alien only gave a cryptic answer, saying, "You will hear them more clearly soon, and then you will understand why only a human could wake them," before walking away, leaving Daniel with 1,000 questions and not one clear answer. That night the whispers returned, louder than before, not just a single voice but many, layered together like a chorus, their words still fragmented but filled with urgency. And Daniel gripped his blanket tight as he listened, his heart racing, wondering if he was losing his mind. But deep down he knew the voices were real, tied to the seeds, tied to the soil, tied to him. And though he longed to run, to flee the colony and never look back, something inside him would not let him leave, a pull stronger than fear itself, a feeling that if he abandoned the fields now he would regret it forever, because whatever was buried here was not just alien, it was important, perhaps even galaxy-changing. And for reasons he could not yet grasp, he had been chosen to uncover it. Daniel returned to the fields the next morning with a heaviness in his chest, the whispers from the night still echoing in his mind. And as the twin suns rose over the horizon, the strange soil shimmered more brightly than ever before, as though the land itself was waiting for him, alive with anticipation. And though every part of him wanted to deny what he had seen and heard, he knew deep down that the seeds buried beneath were no ordinary objects. They were alive, countless and ancient, and his every step across the glowing earth felt like a step across the surface of something vast and sleeping. Gripping the plow tightly, he began to work, the blade cutting into the soil with a strange resistance. And with each turn of the earth, sparks rose higher than before, swirling in the air like fireflies, and the ridges behind him no longer lay flat but swelled upward, pulsing faintly in rhythm with his heartbeat. And it was then that he realized the land was responding not just to his labor, but to him personally, the soil and seeds stirring more violently the longer he worked, as though they were feeding on his presence, on the touch of a human hand. By midday, he uncovered a cluster of smaller crystal-like objects glowing faintly under the surface, and when he brushed them clear with his hands they vibrated together, humming like a chorus of low voices, and as he stared at them they cracked, slightly, releasing thin beams of light that stretched toward him before vanishing into his skin, leaving his arms tingling and his mind filled with fleeting images, endless stars, towering shapes moving across alien skies, and an overwhelming feeling of being part of something vast beyond imagination. Gasping, Daniel staggered back, but the soil shifted beneath his boots, and new growth erupted where he had plowed. Not plants like he knew, but tall stalks of translucent green that bent toward him, like living things recognizing their caretaker, their surfaces rippling with light that moved like veins. And he realized in awe and dread that he was not planting crops, but awakening creatures, beings that had slept beneath the soil for perhaps centuries, perhaps longer, waiting for someone to stir them back into life. When he glanced up, he saw the Thaleri gathered at the edges of the fields, silent and unmoving, their ember-bright eyes fixed on him as though he were performing a ritual they had waited generations to witness. And though fear prickled through his body, he felt a strange pull inside, as if a bond had already formed between him and the soil-born beings. And the voices in his head grew louder, layered and insistent, whispering fragments of words he could almost understand. Guardian, Awakener, Tiller. And he clutched the plow tighter, realizing that no matter how much he wished to escape, he was bound to the fields now, and his every movement was leading to something larger than himself. The day dragged on with the ground trembling more often, ridges forming into shapes that almost resembled limbs pressing upward from below. And though nothing fully broke free yet, Daniel could sense it coming, the tension in the earth building, like a storm about to erupt. And when night finally fell, he lay awake again, his body aching, but his mind restless, hearing the hum of the soil through the walls, louder than ever, until it became impossible to tell if the sound was outside or inside his own skull. And when he closed his eyes, he saw visions of the fields stretching endlessly across worlds, all glowing, all alive. And he knew with a deep certainty that what he was awakening was not just confined to this colony, but was part of something greater, a living network that had slept through ages, waiting for a single touch to rise again. And for reasons he could not yet explain, that touch had to come from a human, from him, which filled him with both terror and a strange sense of destiny. Because if he was truly the one to awaken these fields, then he was also the one who would face whatever emerged when the soil finally split open and revealed what had been hidden for so long. Daniel awoke before the suns rose, his body sore and his mind heavy with visions that refused to fade. Images of fields glowing like oceans of fire under alien skies, shapes stirring beneath the soil, and a constant chorus of whispers that seemed louder each night. And though he longed to push the thoughts away, he knew they were not dreams. They were messages, fragments of a truth he had only begun to touch. And when he walked back to the fields, the air felt charged, alive with expectation, as though the land itself was waiting for him. And when he arrived, he saw the Thaleri gathered once more, their tall figures standing silently in the dim light, eyes glowing faintly, watching him with the same unreadable intensity that had haunted him since the first day. And finally, he could no longer hold back the question that burned in his chest. So he faced Athalos and demanded to know why the soil responded only to him, what exactly he was awakening, and why they had brought him here. And this time the alien did not answer with riddles, but with a grave calm that carried the weight of history, explaining that the fields were not farms, but ancient incubators, seeded long before their people had built the colony, created by a civilization older than the Thaleri themselves, a civilization that vanished but left behind life waiting to be born. And though the Thaleri had guarded the fields for generations, they could never awaken them, for the soil rejected their touch, remaining silent no matter how many of their kind worked it. But when humans spread into the galaxy, the Thaleri learned that the old soil stirred at human hands, and so they began to bring workers, one after another, but most lacked the will or courage to press deep, until Daniel came. And the land responded as if recognizing him, calling him the Tiller, the one chosen to open what had been sealed for ages. Hearing this filled Daniel with a storm of emotions: fear, anger, disbelief, and a strange threat of pride that unsettled him most of all. And he asked what would happen when the seeds awakened fully, but Athalos's answer only deepened the mystery, for he said, "They are not crops, not beasts, not masters nor slaves. They are something new, something waiting to join the galaxy, and they will rise because of you." And though the words sounded like hope, Daniel also heard danger in them, because nothing that slept for ages beneath alien soil could be simple or safe. As the day went on, he returned to work, each strike of the plow sending tremors through the ground, each row glowing brighter, and more stalks rose from the earth like crystalline towers, bending toward him as if acknowledging their awakener, and the whispers in his mind grew clearer, forming words in a language he did not know yet somehow understood, promising unity, power, and change, but also carrying tones of hunger that made his heart pound with dread. And as the sun set and the sky burned violet, he looked out over the vast fields now alive with light and movement, and he knew the moment of awakening was near, and that the truth of what he had unleashed would either lift humanity to new heights or condemn it to a danger greater than anything the galaxy had ever known. Daniel stood at the edge of the fields as the twin suns dipped below the horizon, the sky burning with shifting colors of violet and green, and before him the land glowed brighter than ever, the ridges he had plowed no longer subtle, but rising tall like the backs of great creatures, pressing against the surface, and the whispers in his mind had become a storm of voices, layered, urgent, almost pleading, calling him not by his name, but by the title they had given him: Tiller, Awakener, Guide. And though every instinct told him to run, to escape into the darkness and never return, he found his feet rooted to the soil, unable to abandon the life stirring beneath, because deep inside he knew the truth. He was part of it now, bound to the seeds as surely as the seeds were bound to the earth. And if he fled, he would never be free, because they would follow him, in dreams, in whispers, in every heartbeat until he returned. The ground trembled beneath him as fissures split open across the fields, light spilling out in brilliant streams, and from within rose shapes not fully formed, beings of glowing energy and translucent flesh that shifted like liquid glass, their movements graceful yet unsteady, like children waking from a deep and endless sleep. And though their appearance filled Daniel with all their voices inside his head, brought a deeper weight, speaking not in threats but in a strange chorus of trust, telling him that they had waited for a human hand to break their prison, that the Thaleri were only keepers but never chosen, and that now it was his task to lead them into a galaxy that had long forgotten their kind. As he listened, Athelos approached silently, his glowing eyes reflecting both fear and reverence, and he said softly that the Thaleri had always known this day would come, that they had waited not for power but for a bridge, someone who could connect what had been lost to what now lived, and that Daniel was that bridge, whether he wished to be or not. But Athelos also warned that with birth came hunger, and hunger could lead to destruction if left unguided. And so Daniel understood the choice before him: he could turn away, leaving the creatures to grow wild and uncontrolled, or he could accept the burden of guiding them, shaping their awakening, and in doing so risk everything, for he had no promise they would remain peaceful or loyal. His hands shook as the beings rose higher, their forms becoming more solid, their eyes opening like twin stars. And when they looked at him, he felt the weight of galaxies pressing into his mind, visions of countless worlds, of civilizations rising and falling, of lives lived and lost, and within all of it the echo of one truth: they recognize him, not the Thaleri, not anyone else, but him. And in that moment Daniel knew he could not run, because running would mean unleashing chaos, while staying meant he could at least try to guide them, to shape whatever they were into something less dangerous, maybe even something good. So he gripped the plow one last time, pressing it into the soil with all his strength, and the ground erupted in blinding light as the fields awakened fully, 1,000 voices filling his mind like thunder, not in pain but in unity. And as the Thaleri knelt at the edges of the field in silent awe, Daniel stood tall, his fear still heavy, but his resolve stronger, knowing that his life was no longer his own, that he was no longer just a desperate worker scraping for credits, but the chosen, awakener of a new people. And as the glowing beings gathered around him, their voices whispering of journeys to come, Daniel felt both dread and hope, for he understood that what he had awakened would change the galaxy forever. and that the legacy of humanity would now be written not only in stars, but in the soil of a world that had chosen him above all others.